everyone, and welcome to Geotab's Wildcard Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, my name is Shay Green. I'm a learning consultant here at Geotab. For today's session, we'll be hearing from Ricky Rivera, one of our senior customer success specialists, and he's going to discuss safety trend reporting. While Ricky gives a little introduction of himself, we are actually going to go ahead and launch a quick poll for you guys. We just want to see what areas you would like to focus on for today's presentation. So while that's up there, Ricky, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So hi, everybody. I hope everybody's had a great Canada Day or Independence Day. Wherever you are, I hope you had a great weekend as well. But super excited to be here and talk about trend reporting. Just a little bit about me. I've been with Geotab for 3 years now. I've had customers from tens of devices to hundreds, and even recently this last year with thousands of devices and thousands of drivers. So I hope that you hear the different examples at your level of your fleet today and how you can actually go ahead and apply those. Definitely worked with the product development team to work on different custom reporting and different tweaks and so on. So a lot of the reports that you're going to see today are some that I've actually created for our team, our customer success team, so that way we can help our thousands of customers out there in the field as well. So really excited to go over that, and we're going to be focusing on safety today, and we have more to come on different pillars and different aspects in the future as well.
Awesome, perfect. So we just closed out that poll, guys. It looks like with a resounding 86%, we have safety scorecard in at number 1, speeding at 41%, and then very closely followed here, or actually they're exactly the same, the ABCs and seatbelt are both at 27%. So it looks like the people want to see safety scorecard and speeding information today.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely have a bunch of information on both of those. The safety scorecard actually as well, we'll get into, it'll be one of the slides right through the middle of this presentation today. So let's get right into it actually. I'll go ahead and show my agenda here. First thing that we're going to talk about is what even is trend data? What is that it even do? What's it about? Another big thing is for you as a fleet manager, somebody who's has hundreds of trucks and so on. Why is it even important? Why should I even take the time to look at it? Why should I build reports for trend data and so on? And then as well, we're going to get into how do you get trend data off of your Geotab database. I'm going to show an example of it, and that way you can build things on your own and go from there. Go wild with it. From there, I'm going to actually go over specific examples, all in safety. We're going to go over the ABCs, some trend data over acceleration, braking, and cornering. We're going to get into seatbelt. We're going to get into speeding, and like we have that overwhelming amount in the poll, safety scorecard. We'll get to that as well and show how you can actually trend out your safety scorecard. I am going to offer you some resources as well. A lot of the graphs that you're going to see today are from some custom built reports that we've actually made available. They're actually handouts available on this presentation, so that way you can get them, use them. There are instructions on how to actually install them as well onto your database, onto your dashboard, so that way you can use them. And we have a lot of other resources as well in regards to safety throughout. And again, we'll actually bring it to a close with the questions at the end. If there's a question that we don't get answered kind of in this speed round, we'll definitely follow up with you to make sure we can get those questions answered. So let's get right into it. What is trend data? And let's talk about really why it's important. So trend data is a tool used to make projections and assessments of data over a period of time. So big definition there. Let me ask you a fun question. How can you set up a policy if you don't know where you are right now? Right? If you don't know where your safety is, your speeding is, your idle cost is, or anything like that, how can we ever begin to just set a policy? If we'd basically be shooting in the dark if we just don't know where we are, right? And so trend data is going to allow you to pick a bigger picture, a bigger perspective on where you're at right now, so that way you can start driving policy. I'm showing this graph to you. It's going to come up later in the presentation. This is a customer who wanted to understand how many aggressive driving violations they had month by month and the total amount from hard acceleration, cornering, and braking all put together on there. And that way they can start driving policy. We'll talk specifically about their changes that they made. As you can see, a huge spike in September and then a big dip towards December of 2019. So that's a big thing, looking at all your data, giving you perspective, giving you insight before you go and make a policy. So why is it important to you? Big point here So it helps you influence decision making. If you have the data, that can back you up in any big decisions that you need to make. It can help you predict as well the future of where you're going. If you don't know, where you were in the past, and how can you ever predict the future as well? One big thing that a lot of customers, especially in that hundreds to thousands of device and fleet size, they have a driver policy, something written down. It's an agreement between themselves and the driver understanding the importance behind safety in their vehicle, their use of their vehicle, how they're even operating as a fleet overall. And it's really just making sure that you have something written down that you can track and measure. If you don't have that trend data available, it's going to be very hard for you to really be able to measure your policy working correctly. Are you getting better? Are you saving anything? Are you off track by something? Do we need to implement any change? Some big items and takeaways, reasons why trend data is requested for as two specific pillars. One we're going to get in today is safety, right? They lower the total cost of safety and fuel. So let me talk about those just overall, kind of give some perspective here. Let's talk about safety. There's a report by OSHA and NHTSA and NETS that estimated one accident could cost an employer up to $500,000. I want you all to think about, would that put your company at a serious risk, a serious financial risk, if just one accident were to happen? What if you had a driver safety policy in place that would allow you to then measure, are my drivers getting safer on the road, thus less likely for something like that to happen? Right. Another side of it is fuel costs. Even 1 hour of idling per week could cost your business up to $65 per truck per year. That seems like a small amount now, but what if that hour goes up to 8 hours a week, and that 8 hours gets multiplied by 100 different vehicles? That's going to end up in thousands of extra dollars of maybe a hidden cost that you're not aware of. Today, we're not going to get so much into idling. We'll save that for another conversation, but it's just giving you some perspective of, if you can have the data available, maybe you can drive change in your policy to then help you out further in the future. So with that, we're going to get into how to get trend data. Let me give you a quick warning. This is not an in-depth, step-by-step detail. It's just to give you a quick kind of guidance so that way you can get the raw data and have fun with it, okay? So one great report that we do have is called the Risk Management Report. It's under the Activity tab on your Geotab database. And what it allows you to do is pull a large amount of data very quickly. So it's a great report to be able to pull that. And when you actually load up that tab, it's going to allow you to choose for a certain amount of time. In most of the graphs today, you're going to see a 12-month data. So you're going to see here, I click custom. I chose the last 12 months for all of 2019. And then another large part here is the sub-periods. This is going to be crucial for you in creating your graphs, creating your trend sets, and so on. Do I want to see trends from a daily basis, so 365 bar charts, which may not work out depending on the amount of data that you're looking at? Weekly, so break it down weekly, every single week. Am I getting better by week by week by week? Or monthly? Am I setting an overall picture, overall policy that I just want to review? How did my last 3 months look? My last 6, my last 12 months, okay? Now, for today, we're going to be looking at the exceptionals. You can kind of see them at the top right. Acceleration, braking, cornering, seatbelt speeding, and even speeding over 90. So just some things to look at there. But for you, I want you to consider, what rules maybe do you want to be able to catch and see how many times they're being broken, for how long they're being broken, for what distance they're being broken, and so on. Once you click that report button in the top right corner there, you're able to actually download the Excel version of the report. The report will look something like this. So you can see we have some Avengers folks here, and we have some Ontario folks here. But the big thing here is, in Excel, you can create a pivot chart. Pivot chart allows you to choose your x-axis. So you can actually choose, do I want this bi-weekly? Do I want this bi-monthly? And therefore, you can graph out any of the data sets that you're looking at, whether it's in safety and speeding and so on. This is just giving you a picture of how to get it. From this point forward, then you can start seeing, okay, how can I tweak this for my own in creating some different graphs for me that's going to work for my driver policy and so on. So now let's switch gears. I'm going to give you some examples, some real world examples of different customers that I happen to work with that have been using trend data pretty heavily to influence change at their company. The first one is going to be on aggressive driving. So just again, acceleration, braking, and cornering for the last 12 months. Let's bring up that graph that we had up earlier. In this graph, again, we're seeing 12 months worth of data and the totals of aggressive driving. When I met the customer, it was right at the end of September 2019. And you could see there a huge spike up of aggressive driving events. Something was going on there. They didn't understand why it was that they went from August to September having such a huge increase. And what they found out was when they onboarded new drivers, those new drivers didn't have a safety policy assigned to them, nothing written down. They kind of just got into the trucks ready to go and just started working. And they weren't really paying attention to how often they were slamming their brakes, how much they were, actually accelerating quickly, and so on. As a result of that, what they started doing between September to October is having a lot of individual regional meetings with the different regional managers to make sure, hey guys, let's try to really work on this and focus on this, because at the end of September, this was our numbers. Once I did that, you can already see right away a huge spike down, right? We met again at the end of October, and they had a big, about 30% decrease overall of the amount of violations. And then again, we met in November, and the same thing happened again. Now it's about overall about 50 to 60% decrease from where they were in September. So they maintain that, and so on, all the way up to March. And here's a fun fact, right? From March to April, they got more new drivers, but you see how there wasn't a huge spike there again. They wouldn't have been able to actually show that spike if they didn't have some kind of trend data available to show them where they were, to then influence change, create a policy, make sure every new driver's got that written down policy and that they're following that, and then to maintain that level of safety. So with aggressive driving rules, I do want to just take a look at those rules overall and understand how they work. We do need to know that aggressive driving, it's all in the amount of acceleration events that are happening left, right, forward, and backwards for the actual vehicle. And the size of the vehicle does impact how often the actual rule is broken as well. I'm sure some of the companies on here with larger fleets, larger trucks, I should say, larger trucks, maybe water trucks or whatever it is, they may have more acceleration events, they may have more braking events and so on because of the way that the vehicle operates. So here's just a little graph as a takeaway for you. You'll be able to have a copy of this presentation, but this is just something to help you out in figuring out, okay, depending on the weight of my vehicle, I should probably have the sensitivity set at maybe more of that light duty, or maybe I have more medium duty vehicles, so I should have it right down the middle in the truck/Q van sensitivities. Why am I bringing this up? Well, our next graph, our next customer, had a serious event where they had it, this is their top 20 aggressive drivers out of 450 drivers. Now, I've taken out the drivers' names to save the innocents, but you can see in red here, what's the issue? Hard acceleration is going through the roof while cornering and braking are kind of just there, right? They aren't terrible, but they aren't the best either, right? So they were about to institute a policy to actually lower the hard acceleration rule for all 450 of their drivers, but they were setting that policy off of just 20 drivers. So when we dug in further, because we had this last 12 months of data trended out, we found out that those top 20 drivers are all water truck drivers. So every time that they were going, the water in the back of their vehicle in their tank was actually sloshing back and sloshing forward. And so therefore, hard acceleration kept going off unnecessarily. So what they decided to do is, now that they had the data, they were able to go ahead and create new versions of the hard acceleration rule, and then to only apply it to those 20 drivers who even drive those vehicles, because the remainder of the vehicles only drove Ford F-150s. It didn't carry any water or anything like that. So if they didn't have that data available, they would have instituted change that would have impacted all of their fleet and would have incorrectly impacted them. So it's important to realize, if you can look at all that data in a bigger picture, that gives you a much better perspective to go ahead and make a change in your policy. So we're going to move towards seatbelt data. So one thing you're going to notice up top here, now I'm talking about last 18 months. Totally doable, right? If you want 18 months, you want last 24 months, it's going to be more data, of course, but in this case, this customer has been working with us for the last 18 months, and they actually wanted to pull a graph on how are they doing in seatbelt. They had, unfortunately, a lot of fatal accidents that drivers were not wearing their seatbelts. And so they wanted to make sure that they could actually bring that number down as soon as possible. Let me show you their last 18 months. It was pretty huge over on the left side, right? January 2019. It was about December, Christmas time or so that we had a big meeting with this customer talking about the number of violations. They were actually in the 14,000 number of violations in seatbelt rule, and their distance traveled without wearing a seatbelt was close to 30,000 miles. That's a huge risk to the drivers themselves and just being injured on duty. And with that, they are driving thousands of miles per week. It's a huge risk for them. So we got together, we started talking about a policy. What can we do to make sure that drivers can then go ahead and start using their seatbelt, plugging them in, and so on. And we started instituting driver feedback. We started making sure that managers are getting a weekly report on who are the highest offenders of seatbelt. And you can see right away, February, March, May, numbers are going down. June and July, numbers are going down all the way up to just a month or so ago now in May, only 920 events out of close to 350 drivers. That's a huge amount. Big decrease, big win for this customer because they were able to see where they were, and now they can see the change of their policy being impacted. So we're going to get into speeding. So this is going to be a fun one. I know this is one of the ones that was very important for the crew that's on the call today. I want you to look at the top here. I'm saying previous 30 days and by week. You don't always have to go by month, right? Remember that example I gave in towards the beginning, creating your own trend data reports. You can actually have it sort out by week. And that was exactly the case for this customer. They have a rule at 10 miles per hour for 20 seconds. They do 10 by 20 because 10 allows them just enough space to pass the slow poke driver. Has anybody ever had that? You know, just a slow driver on the road, like they're not even following the speed limit. And then 20 seconds, giving just a little bit of grace so that way they can actually pass that driver. But anything more than those two numbers, of course, is going to be unsafe. So that's the rule that they chose to go ahead and monitor, and they chose to break it down by week. So let me show you a graph that they've got here. We had early meetings in the May timeframe and started building out a previous 30 days, but by week trend report of the speeding rule. So you can see in red here the total number of times the speeding count was broken, and in yellow the amount of distance traveled while speeding. So week by week, every time they got this report, they were able to talk to those drivers, coach them, try to bring those numbers down as much as possible. So much so that once it got down to June, the drivers really got it. And because of that, in that last month of June, out of about 200 or so drivers, they had only 67 incidents of speeding. So that's awesome, right? Being able to influence change. Now, another thing that you can do with speeding, some of the larger customers, they really like being able to actually measure out a concept called violation over 100 miles. Well, why is this? A violation over 100 miles allows you to really be able to say, okay, my driver is pretty safe or is very unsafe every 100 miles. I want to talk to you about how you can use your trend data to create this calculation, and I'm going to show you how it is actually calculated as well. So let me take a look at how it's actually calculated. To actually create a violation per 100 miles, take the overall speeding count or speeding exceptions, divided by the total amount of distance for the week or month, whatever data set you're looking at, and we're going to multiply it by 100, or the over 100 miles. And what that does is that gives you a small number, kind of a 1.0 or a 2.0 or 3.0. And you can then physically say, okay, well, my driver was speeding 3 times every 100 miles. And so for some fleet managers, that might be huge for them. Three times every 100 miles, what are you doing, right? You need to slow down. There's no reason to be speeding. There's no reason to be going that fast. For some managers, they actually said, you know what, we want to make sure that anytime it's over a 1.0, we're bringing in that driver, we're giving them some coaching, you know, maybe writing them up or whatever it is, or on the flip end of it, rewarding the driver for safe driving habits, right? For not breaking the violations as much. I'm going to show you a graph here. Again, I removed the driver's names just to save the innocent here. But what I want you to look at is on the right side. You're going to see violation over X mile. That just put that as violation per 100 miles. But the most unsafe driver here drove essentially 3.66 violations per 100 miles. Then you look to the left side of that first row, you got 889 miles driven that week and 34 speeding violations that week. So again, we take 34 speeding count, divided by total distance, 889, and we multiply it by 100, and it gets that number of 3.66. So this manager is going by the standard of anybody over 1.0 needs to get coached, needs to, you know, maybe potentially get written up, and any driver under 1.0 should be rewarded in some kind of way, recognized in some kind of way. So just a unique way of being able to use your speeding data and think through them. And you could potentially use violation over 100 for any other rule that you may like. Maybe seatbelt might work for you as well. So we'll get into the safety scorecard. I'm going to take my time through this because I really want to make sure that you understand that you can, in fact, trend out to the last 12 months of data for your safety scorecard. What you would just need to do is the safety scorecard is built off of the risk management report, exactly using that template itself. So all you would need is to take your safety scorecard and remember that option that I chose there, either by daily, weekly, or monthly. Choose the monthly option, pull it for the last 12 months of data, and you're going to get all the line items of data for every single month. With a couple of tweaks and so on, you can actually get the average of the last 12 months or the average per month for every single one, and then being able to show how did your fleet do month by month. In this case, that's something I did for this customer here. So let me show you that. This is actually a customer about 180, 185 total vehicles or so. So we got a 94.5 average score out of the last 12 months. At the bottom left, you may be familiar with the medium risk and mild risk. This customer, although they were pretty safe, right? A 94.5 average, that's kind of like a mid-A range, right? If we're thinking A through F. And so with that, they're doing pretty good, but every fleet has its opportunities. And in fact, this fleet had some opportunities early on. This next graph here is showing the last 12 months of that same score. So back in July of 2019, they were at a 91.7. And when we were looking at it back then, we were working together back then, the high risk and medium risk numbers were pretty high. You had about 5 or so high risk. You had about 10 to 20 medium risk drivers. And that's what was driving that score down early July. They've been working on that. To be able to go over and say, who are our biggest coaching opportunities every single month? And then you can see how it's gradually increased overall from month to month to month. So now let's look at a further breakdown of the safety scorecard. This customer really liked being able to look at their bottom performers. So since they had the last 12 months of data, they can see, okay, who were my worst performing drivers, or maybe the drivers with the biggest coaching opportunities for this actual month here. And we can actually see that we had the worst performer at 69.9, all the way up to the number 10 worst performer at 77.3. So that's not necessarily a terrible score, but it's definitely not where we want to stay, right? We want them to be at an A and above, or a 90 and above. The rules this customer happened to be using was their ABCs, seatbelt, speeding, and speed over 90. So they were able to then see who those were, and then to start working with those folks individually. Again, I've taken out the driver names here, but I want you to imagine who your drivers are, right? Can you tell right away who are your biggest opportunity drivers for the whole year, looking at 12 months worth of data? And then once you have all that data together, wouldn't you want to know then, as a fleet, what's your biggest opportunity per individual rule? Well, you can average out the columns that are measuring the acceleration, braking, cornering, and so on, and create an opportunity for your actual fleet. Let me show you what I mean. You can average out all of the data that's showing an acceleration, braking, and cornering, and so on, to see, okay, what number here is where I should focus my time. I should really focus on working with my drivers on getting better on. In this case, right there in orange, 63.9 harsh cornering was a #1 opportunity for these drivers. And for this customer, they were always on straightaway roads. They made several turns and so on, and all of those turns are the ones that they were just going way too fast on. This wasn't maybe a mountain town or mountain city or anything like that. They were on straightaways. So this is truly where the drivers really had opportunities to get better at cornering, at making a turn, so that way they weren't actually toppling over their vehicle or putting their vehicles at risk and themselves at risk. The hard acceleration rule was second, and speeding was the third biggest opportunity for this fleet to be able to go ahead and start influencing change, maybe change their driver policy to make it tighter, to provide coaching opportunities for their drivers, or even maybe incentivize and reward safe driving habits. So I hope that helps out, and just kind of taking a look at some of the ideas there behind the safety scorecard and trending them out. And then this report, just like I said in the very beginning, will be available for you to go ahead and download and play around with. So let's talk about next steps, the next kind of takeaway for trends. I'm actually, in about 2 weeks here, going to be able to provide another presentation on productivity trends. What we're going to look at is going to be idle cost, fleet distance, engine on time, and asset utilization. All four things that a lot of customers from different ranges, from hundreds of devices to thousands, even in the tens, they want to know, is their vehicle being used appropriately? Did they waste money on buying the vehicle? Do they need to swap around the vehicle and bring it to a different location and so on? So please tune in June 22nd for that next presentation I'll be leading for productivity trends. I'm going to go into our resources here. You should have already seen in the handouts a copy of the trend report last 12 months. So that's going to include your seatbelt, your speeding, all your aggressive driving graphs that you saw here in this presentation. And then the safety scorecard trend report already built out for you so that way you can use that to go ahead and see where was I at 12 months ago? Where am I at this month? Am I getting better? Who's my biggest opportunities to work on and coach? And then what are the biggest opportunities as an entire fleet as well? Throughout the presentation, you saw different links and so on, and some of the names and so on. That's actually listed out right here. One I really want to call out that I think you should take a look at right away is the approved sample fleet policy for light to medium duty vehicles. Even if you got a heavy duty vehicle fleet, please take a look at it and see what is your driver policy compared to some of the things we've got here. Our very own Susan Miller was actually able to create that. She actually worked with Geotab's legal team as well to really drive home the point of what does a great fleet policy look like? How is it maintained? What are the things that you're looking at, metrics you're looking at, and so on? And Susan Miller worked for McDonald's for over 2 decades, which McDonald's has thousands upon thousands of drivers and trucks. So she has tons of experience in that, and I would definitely take a minute to look at that fleet policy just as some samples as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ricky. First question that we have up here for you, Ricky, is the trend of aggressive driving events graph report able to be shared?
You could definitely share with anyone on your team, anyone in your database. Any report with Geotab, you can send it to different groups of folks, maybe different regional managers that need to see it. That way you can pull up and have your own meetings with them and so on. So yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Alrighty, next question that we have here. Have you done the analysis that shows that low-risk drivers are in fact less likely to get in an accident and vice versa, high-risk drivers are more likely to get into an accident?
It's a great question. There's a lot of actual, let me go back to right over here. These are some of the actual research that Geotab has actually done, so you can go ahead and click on those to see some of the research that have been done there. From my own experience, I can say that for sure there's been a direct correlation with if we can actually help the high-risk drivers become more low risk, it is way less likely for them to get accidents because my customers have told me they've gotten into way less accidents as a result of that. It has a lot to do with balancing your fleet driver policy as well. If you're measuring your drivers based on their speeding habits, their aggressive driving habits and so on, and you're providing the coaching opportunities, it's just less likely that they are going to go out there and cause any accidents or being involved in any accidents or anything like that, or any collisions, I should say.
Alrighty, next question that we have is, how can you switch the trend report to kilometers instead of miles?
Oh yeah, when you download the report, it's dependent upon your user settings. So your user settings on your dashboard, if you're set it by your local region, if you do everything by kilometers, perfect. It'll actually print out the report in that. There may be some words that maybe you want to go ahead and change around. I think there's a couple times where maybe the word miles is written out in Excel, so that's a hard kind of code, but you would just rename it kilometers on that. But for most of the different cells in the trend report and the safety scorecard, they are there that, whatever your settings are, it'll download in kilometers. And if there's any maybe miscalculation or anything from miles to kilometers, you may want to just double check those calculations. But pretty much everything from your risk management report is just based on your settings themselves. So you shouldn't have to do any kind of coding or changing around or anything like that. Hope that makes sense.
Alrighty, next question that we have for you, Ricky, is I manage a database with 2,000 vehicles. When I try and run reports for the last 12 months on speeding, seatbelts, etc., the system gets overloaded with data and has trouble downloading. What would you recommend to help with this?
Yeah, great question. It's perfect for me because I have a lot of customers that are in that range, right? 2,000 devices, 3,000 drivers, those kind of things. What they do is they take one rule only, so they don't try to do it by a lot of rules. So if you're just going to do speeding, then just do one speed trend report for the last 12 months. And that happens to work just fine. It downloads right away, maybe a good 2 minutes or so, but it is able to download. If it does become too chunky or it crashes or anything anything like that, I may recommend just breaking it down by last 3 months instead, or maybe last 6 months and trying that out. That way you can see, okay, maybe that actually works and downloads again. So one rule for the last 3 months or the last 6 months or so on. With the risk management report and these reports here allow you to go ahead and run it by the time frame that you'd like. So you can always choose a certain time that you want. And since it's all in Excel, you can put all the data into one Excel after the fact as well. But I really haven't had to do that last suggestion. Even for my bigger customers, it's just been, okay, you want speeding? Great, well, let's do a speed trend in the last 12 months, all your fleet, all your drivers and so on. Don't run it for any extra rules. Other things you can think about if you're creating your own version of a trend report, or really any report for that matter, is look at the data tab of the actual report itself. It's a hidden tab, so you may need to unhide the actual tab within Excel. But look in that data tab and see, are there any columns of data that you're not even going to use? Because if you can delete those columns of data, that's going to make it download sooner because you aren't asking the server to actually download it. And that might make your report even smaller because it's less data being put into there. So just another idea to think about there in deleting extra columns that you don't necessarily need.
Alrighty, the next question that we have here is, for the water trucks with the false positives for the ABCs, how did you fix that?
So we actually put the water trucks in a separate group. So entirely different group from their other 430 drivers or so. So that way they have their own group, and then I could actually put their own 3 aggressive driving rules. The acceleration one set up specifically to be at a heavy duty sensitivity, so it goes off less likely. And then put it to that group only. So only point to that group. So the only people that will get monitored on that particular custom version of the rule will be in that one group. And then finally, create an aggressive driving report on their dashboard for just that group. So instead of looking at all of the fleet, only look at the one, right? And that was able to eliminate the excess data going on their main one because they're not looking at that anymore. They're looking at the actual, just that one report. So now they've got 2 reports total, one for their entire rest of their fleet, the 430 or so, and then they've got 20 water truck drivers that have their own safety scorecard. So you've got 2, but it allows them to go ahead and quickly compare the 2 and be more direct with which vehicle they are actually in.
Alrighty, next question that we have, do you have to manually change the trend report tabs to reflect your own rules?
Not necessarily the tabs. So let me go back here while I flip through all these guys over here. It just depends on what rules you choose here, right? So you don't need to necessarily change around any of the tabs or anything. Once you download the actual risk management report, for instance, it's going to have the exception rule number 1, exception rule number 2, exception number 3. So really the only thing that matters here is the actual order that you put these in right there, right? So your hard acceleration, maybe you don't want that to be your exception rule number 1, maybe you want it to be speeding first and then harsh braking second or something like that. The risk management report will download the report and show it as such that, okay, exception rule number 1 is speeding, and then exception rule number 2 is hard acceleration, or so on and so forth. So that's really the only thing you need to kind of swap around if you want it to show that way. But once you're in Excel, you can look at the actual report itself and you can rearrange the columns as needed, but it's all in how you create your pivot chart. You pivot your data off of the actual period start date right here, and then you can actually select, okay, which specific column am I looking at? I'm looking at column 1 for card acceleration, and so on and so forth. So I hope that answers that a little bit more in Excel and coding on that question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ricky. It looks like that was actually the last question that we have for today's session. So that does make this a wrap for this week's Wildcard Wednesday. Again, thank you so much to Ricky for joining us today, sharing the presentation and answering everybody's questions. If you do have any further questions that pop into mind over the next few days, don't hesitate to reach out to your reseller or your account manager, and they will definitely get you taken care of. But with that said, until next time, I'm Shay Green, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We'll see you guys next time. Same Geotab time, same Geotab channel. Thanks so much, everybody.